Let's take the classic song Amazing Grace and look at the 5 ways you can learn any song on piano. You can learn by demonstration and just memorize what you see someone else doing. This is a very popular way to learn on YouTube. You can learn using traditional sheet music, which would look like this. And this is the oldest of the methods we'll be looking at. Many pop musicians like to learn songs using chord charts, so that would just be the chord notation for the song. And if you combine traditional sheet music with a chord chart, it looks like this. This is called a lead sheet. And of course, you can always learn a song by ear. Each of these approaches has certain advantages over the others. So let's look at the pros and cons. First, playing by ear is pretty simple to understand. All you need is a recording of the song. And if I tell you that this melody starts on C, you might be able to find the melody to Amazing Grace just through trial and error. But that said, the biggest downside to learning by ear is that it can be a big challenge for students at the beginning. So let's come back to playing by ear and look at learning by demonstration, also known as rote learning. This is the best time in history to learn by demonstration because of video technology, because of all the amazing song tutorials on YouTube and all the folks teaching online in the way that I teach through video. The best thing about learning by rote is that it doesn't assume any prior knowledge, so it works really well for beginners, right? You don't need any theory knowledge to just follow along with what you see my hand doing. And even before we could use video to teach in this way, learning by demonstration was a classic way to teach beginners piano. It's actually how I learned my first song on piano. My mom taught me Heart and Soul. Just the melody there. My mom showed me that to me when I was pretty young, and I had so much fun with it. So that was my introduction to the piano, was learning a song by rote. I wouldn't knock it. It's a great way to get started if you're a beginner. With that said, it leaves certain musicianship skills on the table if you want to get a little more advanced. So let's move on to some of these other more literate approaches to learning music. You're probably familiar with traditional sheet music. Now, if you're interested in classical music, you just have to learn to read sheet music. It is the standard for classical musicians, and it's your connection, your direct connection to classical composers. Even if you're not interested in classical music, there are a lot of great reasons to learn to read sheet music. It's a prerequisite for lead sheets, which we'll talk about in a moment. And it helps you with certain musicianship skills. Learning to read sheet music helps you with rhythm, because learning rhythm notation helps you understand rhythm in a deeper way. And it also gives you a better chance to understand song form, because you can just look at the written music for an entire piece of music and see where the different sections are. And it's harder to get an overview like that a lot of times if you're learning, say, from a video. Now, the best thing about traditional sheet music is that it's so descriptive, right? It shows you exactly what the composer wants. That's also the downside of it. It's very restrictive. It makes improvisation difficult because improvisation is not intended to be part of how you read this kind of music notation. And for that reason, you might be surprised to learn that most professional musicians outside of classical music and the studio world, meaning like studio musicians playing for film scores, most professional musicians in other genres of music do not use traditional sheet music. They do, however, often use chord charts. So with a chord chart, you're just seeing the harmony of the song and sometimes some rhythmic information. Typically, if you see a professional musician using a chord chart on a gig, they probably have listened to the song at least once. So that's a sneaky thing about chord charts. They actually kind of assume that you're also using your ear a little bit. They're using two of these methods at the same time. But the great thing about chord charts is that we see the harmony and we have a lot of opportunity to create our own accompaniment part for different scenarios. So if you're in a band and there's a bass player, I could easily leave room for the bass player and create a chord arrangement based on a chord chart for Amazing Grace. If there's no bass player, though, I can rearrange it and add in more left hand. So as long as you don't need to play the melody, a chord chart is a really practical, straightforward way for an accompaniment instrument like the piano to play a song. Many times you do want to play the melody, though, or you might just want to know where the melody is. So this is when you might use a lead sheet. A lead sheet combines the best of both worlds. It uses the melody written in traditional sheet music notation and chord symbols written above the staff. And sometimes you might see traditional sheet music notation like this with the chord symbols also written above. You could call that a lead sheet, but typically a lead sheet will just have the melody line because it's leaving a lot of room for improvisation. Because of that emphasis on improvisation, lead sheets are the favorite style of notation for jazz musicians. There are huge books of lead sheets called real books that many jazz musicians rely on. There aren't many downsides to learning to play from lead sheets. They do require a strong foundation of theory and arranging skills. And I will say that often students approach me with the singular goal of learning to play lead sheets better. And if you want to use lead sheets to play a style of music like jazz, that does leave out a really important part of learning that style of music, which is the aural tradition of the music, listening. So this brings us back to learning by ear. Now, the downsides of learning by ear are obvious. It's a big challenge. It relies on a foundation of theory knowledge and comfort at the keyboard. If I were to tell you my approach to learning by ear, it's relative pitch. I'm using scale degrees and chord functions to identify what I'm hearing. And that just doesn't make much sense if you haven't already learned all of your scales and your diatonic chords. So the downsides of learning by ear are obvious. It's a big challenge. And even if you have that strong foundation, the first song you learn by ear is going to be way harder than the 20th song that you learn by ear. But for most styles of music, learning by ear is the single best way to learn. If you're interested in working in music, for professionals, having a strong ear is not just a party trick. It is one of your most valuable professional skills. For gigs or for working on recordings, the expectation is that people will just pass around recorded audio and you will be able to figure out what's going on. People are not typically sending along sheet music or even a chart most of the time amongst professional musicians. They're certainly not sending tutorial videos for what they've done already on the recording. So learning to play by ear in whatever style of music you're interested in is really important if you want to get to an advanced level. And even if you don't want to work in music, if you're a passionate hobbyist, playing by ear is a great thing to set as your ultimate goal for the way that you typically learn a new piece of music. It is the most freeing of any of these approaches. All that you need is a recording that you like, and you can dig in and figure out what's going on. And for me, this is really how I've learned the most about music. I know this is true of most of my peers as well. Simply sitting down with recordings that you love and figuring out what's happening will teach you things that no teacher can. So there's our overview. As I've said, there are advantages to all 5 of these approaches to learning a song on piano. And for a certain kind of student, any one of these might be the best. If you're interested in the chord charts, lead sheets, and playing by ear learning track, that's what I focus on with Piano Fluency. So if you're wanting more guidance on that, you should head to my website, pianofluency.com, become a member, and I have a whole program built out for adult students of popular music. You can also subscribe to this channel for more free piano education content. And with that, my name is Ted with Piano Fluency. Thanks for joining me.